is very recent research that shows us that when there is high conflict between the parents that involves the child, this high conflict have impact in the brain of the child. If the conflict happens in the first years of life of the child, all the structure will change. We are not just speaking about how the systems inside the brain works, but we are speaking also about the structure. There are two pathways that, when there is high conflict between parents, could be activated. It's the pathway of cortisol that involves the pituitary, the hypophysis, and all this area of the brain. Another pathway could be the sympathetic pathway of the brain that is involved in the adrenaline system. So we are speaking about cortisol and adrenaline. When you have high levels of cortisol in your brain, and this is during too much time, never lower, is always there. So chronic. When this is also intense, not just chronic, but intense, is high. We need to have a third thing together with these two. You don't have a safe relationship to turn off, to ask, help me. Your two relationships that can protect you, they aren't. Because they are fighting without intention, they forget you are there. There is an area in our brain that is called amygdala, and the connection in the amygdala, they became very strong. Why this is a problem? Because amygdala have the oldest area of our brain. Amygdala doesn't think. Amygdala doesn't have kindness. Amygdala doesn't have understanding. Amygdala doesn't forgive. Amygdala attacks or freeze or fly away. Very primitive. And when you feel that, you don't have compassion. So you can't understand that your child is suffering. We found that children who have this high toxic chronic stress have mothers and fathers with same. They can't help child. The problem is that when amygdala is so activated, there are areas of the brain that simply are not activated, and the connection became lower than they should be. And one of these areas is the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is so important for learning and memory. It's why children live in high conflict co-parenting relationships. When they are in school, teachers say they don't care. Of course they care, but the brain doesn't let them. Teachers tell, oh, they are very, she never speaks. Of course not, she's suppressed. Because one of the impacts could be internalization. So they feel so anxious that they can't think. And another reaction to anxiety could be the externalizing. I became very oppositional. You say something to me and I say, I don't care. And teachers will say, oh, it's awful. Maybe you have hyperactivity disorder. Maybe you have conduct disorder. And they don't. They only need someone to understand what is happening in the brain. Some of them, of course, is always some. In some, the pathway is much more anxiety and depression. And in the others, the pathway is much more externalizing. The externalizing take more risks. And they start to smoke, they start to become addict, they take risks that others don't take. So in future, what happens? They have much more heart disease, they have much more inflammatory disease, they could have much more probability to develop cancer. So we are speaking about a true social problem. Because these people, they are suffering a lot, and we as community and as society, we don't protect them. But also in what concerns economic questions, these people will cost much more to society in future than if you work with them now. Some people that can't never in the adult age have a close relationship with someone, romantic. What we understand is they can't because they can't trust people. All times they try to trust in an adult in the early years. That adult was not there in what concerns emotional relationship. The beautiful thing is that you can, and we are clever as human beings, you can compensate that attachment with relationships that you choose in the adulthood. If you are in the toxic relationship, we need to help people to understand why they are in a toxic relationship and help them to find another one that is not toxic and that can protect and don't increase. So governments need to understand that law is not enough. Law doesn't change emotions in people. We need to do much more. We need to empower communities and we need to empower professionals. We don't change behavior just because we have information. You tell parents, they know they shouldn't, but they do because they are humans. So when I speak about empower, is to do what we call a collaborative empowerment model that I co-construct with you with active methodologies. And active methodologies are methodologies that help you to feel what the child is feeling, help you to feel what parents are feeling, help you to have skills to synchronize with the emotions of the others. But this is not enough. You have to synchronize, but after, you have to give tools to that person. Practice, and after go to your day-to-day life and have my support. If I can do that in group, is much more empowerful. And one mother, when she saw one of the video scenes we show, that is about impact in child of high conflict between parents, mother started to cry. And when she stopped to cry, we said, would you like to go out or would you like to share? At least in my experience, people like to share. And she said, I want to share that during 10 years, I did that to my child. And only now I realize what I was doing. And another mother started to cry and said, I did say. And another mother started to cry. So in that moment, all of them feel human. And they feel they are not sick, they are not bad people. They never thought that suffering they are feeling make them behave in the way. But in this moment, you need to be aware that you need to change. Because what you are doing to your child, mental health and physical health of the child, in risk. And I know you don't want to do that. What do you think that child is feeling? Is always our first question. What do you think that could be the risks of what the child is feeling? What do you think it will be the risk in child future? What do you think that mother should start to try to change? and the results are fantastic. What they show is two things amazing. The conflict between the parents doesn't change with a significant effect size that is a small effect size. But the conflict between parents that involve children decrease. We need to empower people in the health system, because sometimes my pediatrician is the person who can be the first person to speak about that with me. Early year teachers are very important, because if my mother is not sensitive to my sadness, if my father is not sensitive, if the child has a safe relationship to turn, we speak about attachment a lot, but we forget to say, people, that I can develop attachment relationships, not just with parents. We can develop attachment relationship in the first 3 years of life. It's why when we speak about adoption, we know that the probability of you to change is much higher in the first 2 years of life than after. But it's not impossible. You can change, but the window for change close and close and close. It's very difficult to change unless you do a very deep therapy. If there is teachers who need a PhD, it should be early years teachers, not university teachers. Because they are the people who can change in a very positive way. So I always say, please, please put money in the quality of education in the first years of life. And have an adult who can be sensitive, who can answer to the needs, who can read the child. And read a child is a skill that it takes lots of time to develop. And if you are an early year teacher who had parents who put you in the middle of the conflict, it's very difficult for you to synchronize with that child, because you feel afraid of what you are feeling. We are putting parenting as something that needs to be perfect. This puts a pressure in the mother or in the mothers, in the fathers, that makes the fathers and mothers feel I'm not what I should be. And this is a huge problem, because in Europe, parenting burnout is increasing. So people are becoming ill, because burnout is a mental illness, it's not stress. Burnout means that I feel stress in the relationship I have with my children, but I feel also exhausted. I feel that what child feels doesn't matter. And I feel I'm no more the mother I used to be or the father I used to be in the past. And if I could, I will never be mother or father. When a mother or father feels that, they need help. This is a huge risk, because parents want to be so perfect that sometimes they can't have a co-parenting where they cooperate, because the mother or the father say you are not doing what we agree, or the other say you are a bad father or a bad mother because you blah 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 blah. So in the end they feel, I don't like you, I don't want to be with you, and I don't want to be with you too, and they start to fight, divorce. We need to stop to put parenting as something idealistic, as something that needs to be done in just one way, because this is a huge risk, not just parenting burnout, but to divorce, to high conflict divorce. It will increase after divorce. Prevention is always on top. We need to start to change also the political emphasis in the perfect parenting. Good enough parent. If you do what you can with art, you are doing best. Our goal is not cooperation, because some couples can't. Our goal is that they stop to put child in the middle of the conflict. They need to agree in 4 or 5 what we call big rules that are related with the well-being of the child, and they don't need to speak a lot. The child needs both parents. The co-parenting doesn't increase, but the co-parenting that doesn't involve the child increase a lot, the good co-parenting. And burnout decrease a lot. I can eat in the house of my mother, I can eat pizza, and in the house of my father, I can eat soup. But the father doesn't have the right to call the mother saying, "Why don't you give soup?" And sometimes professionals and judges, because they think these 2 parents could never agree, they decide that 1 parent will be erased from the life of the child. And this is not the solution, because the child needs that parent. So they don't cooperate, okay, they have parallel parenting.